Hello and welcome to Michael's Minty Music for today. Today we review the soundtrack for Metroid, released in 1987 on the Nintendo Entertainment System, composed by Hirokazu Tanaka. This soundtrack is available through the Nintendo Music app, along with the soundtrack for the version for the Famicom Disk System, released in 1986 in Japan. The two versions have the same tracks, but they do sound pretty different, and most of the NES tracks are longer on this one. I'll be reviewing both simultaneously in this review, since they're the same music, just kind of arranged and played slightly differently due to different hardware. This is the track listing. There's an exactly 3-minute difference between the two versions, with the NES version being longer. Most of the extra length comes from the first track, Title Screen, and Escape, the second to last track. Still, most of the NES versions are longer by a couple of seconds, except Stillness for some reason, which is the only one which is shorter on the NES by about 20 seconds. Very curious. These are the tracks I added to my playlist, 6 out of 12, so exactly half. I added both versions of each song since they're basically the same. This soundtrack is alright, but it's not outstanding. It does a great job of feeling sci-fi, but the actual music isn't very good out of the context of the game. It works fine for a game, but I wouldn't suggest listening to this music on its own. There are a couple tracks which are actually a little annoying. Stillness is not very good in my opinion, and the opening tracks are a little disappointing. On the plus side, this album mostly has actual tracks on it. There's only 2 kind of like 5-second clips. The previous NES game soundtracks definitely had sort of an issue where there wasn't really enough music to put together a real album. There was just, a handful of tracks and a bunch of 5-second sound effects. Metroid definitely has enough stuff here, although it still ends up being less than 15 minutes for the whole album, so it's still not really big, but at least you have enough kind of going on. Particularly the Mario soundtrack, Super Mario Bros. Half of the tracks are either sound effects or just sped up versions of the other songs. Overall, I would say that this album, Metroid, has some good tracks on it, but as a whole is just alright. Most of the tracks are listenable, but they're not great. A big pull for this album is my favorite song here, Ending, which is actually really great. Probably, especially in the Famicom version, and that version's definitely better than the NES version. And honestly, Ending is probably one of the best songs I've heard on the Nintendo Music app so far. It's definitely competing with those really good Splatoon songs from Splatoon 2 and 3. So, as you may have guessed from that last comment, I rank the Famicom version better than the NES version. The NES version feels a lot more smoothed over and not as interesting as the Famicom version, which is very chunky and it feels a lot more sci-fi. The NES version kind of takes out the interesting things from the Famicom version, unfortunately. You can definitely tell that the soundtrack was made for the Famicom first. Although all the songs are the same, the good songs on the NES are a lot worse, and the bad songs are a lot more boring. The Famicom at least has kind of some interesting stuff going on with the bad tracks, but the NES kind of gets rid of that, so they're just boring. However, despite being a pretty good Famicom soundtrack, I would still say that the Legend of Zelda soundtrack is better than the Metroid soundtrack of the 2 Famicom Disk System games I've reviewed. And this goes for the NES version as well, so Metroid takes the last spot in that rankings. This also means that neither Metroid soundtrack takes the top spot from 1986 or 1987 for Best Nintendo Soundtrack, since the only other competition there so far is the Legend of Zelda soundtracks, which I think are both just better from a music perspective. And from that, you can definitely guess that Metroid doesn't take the top spot for overall soundtracks either. 1986 and 1987 stay with A Kind of Magic by Queen and Kick by INXS respectively. Both of those albums are significantly better than anything video games were really able to do at this point. So, yeah, those keep it. So thank you for watching, and next up, I'm still going to keep you in suspense because my schedule is a bit fluid right now. I'm not 100% sure which album I'll be reviewing next. Either way, it should come out in about a week on kind of a schedule, so stay tuned for that, and as always, stay minty.